Thanks for joining us for a KARE 11 Recovery Inc. investigation. I'm AJ Legault. We uncovered that one of Minnesota's largest and most well-known addiction treatment providers is in a fight for survival. The state and federal government accuse NUWAY of providing illegal kickbacks to clients. At the same time, our investigation discovered tens of millions of dollars in questionable Medicaid billing at the nonprofit, where executives make exorbitant salaries.
Headquartered in the Twin Cities, NUWAY started in the 1960s as one of the nation's very first halfway houses. It now has addiction treatment centers across the state, serving roughly 1,100 clients a day.
I was in intensive outpatient treatment.
Rich LaFortune is a former client. While attending treatment at NUWAY, Rich lived in a sober home paid for by NUWAY.
If I can't have a place to safely lay my head at night, how am I going to get sober?
So for you, having that shelter, having NUWAY cover your housing while you were an outpatient was crucial?
Yes. I was otherwise homeless.
But that arrangement, paying for clients' housing while also billing their taxpayer-funded Medicaid insurance for treatment, has NUWAY's future very much in doubt.
They're looking for something.
This federal raid last summer on a different treatment provider is an example of why. In the wake of a KARE 11 investigation into alleged fraudulent Medicaid billing, the FBI raided Evergreen Recovery in St. Paul. One of the charges, illegal kickbacks in the form of providing free housing in exchange for attendance at treatment services.
What message did the Evergreen raid send to the broader recovery community?
Panic. Absolute panic.
David Glazer is NUWAY's attorney. The panic he describes is because Evergreen and NUWAY are not the only Minnesota treatment centers that pay for clients' housing. Some ended the practice, but NUWAY has not stopped.
Is this a hill NUWAY is going to die on?
Yes, because NUWAY feels really committed to making sure patients can get housing.
It's not a new dispute. KARE 11 discovered NUWAY was notified back in 2022 that they were under a still ongoing federal civil fraud investigation, suspected of using client housing as kickbacks. The Minnesota Department of Human Services also began raising concerns last February, threatening to cut off NUWAY's funding, but has repeatedly delayed action. This letter, dated in December, is their latest correspondence. DHS cites credible allegations of fraud, which include improperly induced services through the use of illegal kickbacks. Pending another delay, DHS says it's stopping all Medicaid payments to NUWAY effective in a few weeks, February 21st. But there's something unusual about that threat.
The Department of Human Services knew exactly what was going on.
This wasn't a secret and DHS knew about it for years?
No, this definitely wasn't a secret.
That is an undeniable fact.
Safe, supportive housing is crucial to long-term recovery.
NUWAY made no secret they paid for clients' housing. They call it their RISE model and publicly tout providing resident support. The University of Minnesota studied NUWAY's RISE model and found improved outcomes. In a 2019 application for the DHS Commissioner Circle of Excellence Award, NUWAY directly told the DHS Commissioner in writing they offered housing contingent upon weekly treatment compliance.
After knowing about the housing subsidies for years, why is the government taking action now?
That's an excellent question. I can't answer that.
We asked DHS for an interview about the kickback claims. It was declined. In an emailed statement, DHS confirmed there's an ongoing investigation but said they cannot disclose any additional information.
So why is there so much concern about housing payments? The federal case against Evergreen Recovery provides some insight.
They got rich through fraud, kickbacks, overbilling.
Prosecutors from the U.S. Attorney's Office sat down with KARE 11 in December to discuss the Evergreen Recovery indictments.
Is there a connection between overbilling and what the DOJ calls this housing kickback scheme?
Absolutely. Kickbacks are presumptively involve fraudulent overbilling. They're an incentive to overbill.
Joe Thompson is the chief of the U.S. Attorney's Fraud and Public Corruption Section. He said he could not comment specifically on any case beyond Evergreen, but offered this general assessment.
A provider that's paying kickbacks is probably overbilling to pay the cost of those kickbacks.
Is overbilling funding NUWAY's housing payments? Their lawyer says no, but Carol Levin has been investigating NUWAY's billing practices for a year, and what we uncovered has clients responding like this.
Oh, that was happening? Holy shit.
As part of our investigation, we uncovered internal NUWAY records where employees claimed they were committing tens of millions of dollars worth of billing fraud. That part of the story after the break. Welcome back. As part of our investigation, we set out to follow the money at NUWAY, Minnesota's largest addiction treatment provider for Medicaid patients. What we found is tens of millions of dollars in questionable billing and deeply flawed government oversight.
The journey towards recovery leads roughly 8,000 Minnesotans a year to a NUWAY addiction treatment center door.
I received wonderful care there.
But what Carol Levin's investigation found going on behind the doors of the nonprofit has otherwise grateful clients like Rich LaFortune questioning how taxpayer-funded Medicaid was billed in their name.
Oh, that was happening? Holy shit.
Rich says at NUWAY, he went to outpatient group treatment in back-to-back meetings from 8 a.m. to noon.
How many hours is that?
8 to noon, that's 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 4.
His records confirm he received 4 hours of treatment, but his billing documents reveal NUWAY charged Medicaid for 5 hours.
That's odd. That's not correct math.
I'll be blunt.
Yeah.
Billing for 5 hours for 4 hours of work sounds an awful lot like fraud.
But they're not billing 5 hours for 4 hours work. What they're doing is billing in a way that's consistent with the instruction that DHS gave.
David Glazer is NUWAY's attorney. He argues the Minnesota Department of Human Services gave treatment providers unclear billing instructions and NUWAY broke no rules.
The government's instruction was once you cross the midpoint of a unit, you can bill a unit.
This gets complicated. Here's what we found happening.
Treatment sessions are billed to Medicaid by the hour. The rules state that in order to bill for that hour, the session must go past the midpoint. NUWAY exploited that midpoint rule, scheduling their treatment sessions in 35-minute blocks. So for 35 minutes of treatment, taxpayers were charged for a full hour. But then, records show NUWAY also double billed. Here's how. From 8 to 8:35, they'd bill for an hour. Then at 8:45, they'd start billing for another hour, double billing for the overlapping 15 minutes. That means every 4 hours of treatment, they billed for 5 hours, inflating their billing by 25%.
Carol Levin's investigation uncovered internal records that reveal top NUWAY employees were concerned that what they were doing equated to tens of millions of dollars in fraud.
This email is dated August 11th, 2022. It's from Morgan Kluwender, NUWAY's Revenue Cycle Director, addressed to CFO John Marston. It says, knowing that we continue to send duplicative claims out daily, I would advise that we stop sending claims, citing the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services definition of fraud, waste, and abuse. The email then details the double billing process and estimates in less than 3 years, they'd overbilled by $58 million. 2 weeks later, NUWAY's CFO Marston sends out this email that indicates they received legal guidance from the law firm Swanson Hatch, run by 2 former Minnesota attorneys general, that the practice of always billing just over the minimum required time is problematic, and they should align programming with the number of hours/units being billed. Both Kluwender and Marston declined Carol Levin's interview requests, but their LinkedIn profiles show both left NUWAY within weeks of those emails being sent. NUWAY's current attorney would not comment on past legal advice. Meanwhile, Client records and state billing data show NUWAY ignored those internal fraud concerns and continued to charge Medicaid millions of dollars for more hours of treatment than they actually gave clients.
That is a huge red flag.
Doug Kelly is the former federal prosecutor in charge of the DOJ's white-collar crime section in Minnesota. He says federal investigators should be looking hard at NUWAY's billing, but DHS, which oversees Medicaid, has some major explaining to do.
Who is asleep at the switch to allow this to go on for so long and for so many millions of dollars?
That's a question Carol Evan has been asking for more than a year. Our Recovery Inc. investigations exposed how DHS approved tens of millions of dollars in questionable Medicaid payments to other addiction treatment providers without adequate oversight. After our reports, the FBI launched ongoing criminal investigations of Refocus Recovery and its for-profit partner Kairos, and the owner of Evergreen Recovery is now facing federal fraud charges.
It's simply unacceptable. It's maddening.
Governor Walz recently announced a new investigative unit to crack down on fraud in state-run programs, and shortly thereafter, that DHS Commissioner Jody Harpstead is stepping down, effective next week. For months, Harpstead declined Carol Evan's interview requests, but sent a statement about NUWAY's billing that says in part, it's indefensible when providers use loopholes in state law to circumvent the rules.
DHS is often very obtuse and then accuses people of wrongdoing for that inability to read their minds.
NUWAY's attorney says for the past year, DHS has accused them of fraud, in part for billing for services not provided as billed. But the agency didn't add clarifying language to their midpoint billing rules until September, and NUWAY immediately complied. The rules now read, billable treatment units should not cover a previously billed time, and scheduling units less than 1 hour deprives the client of the benefit of the full unit of service.
I feel like I've been taken advantage of.
For clients and taxpayers, what was going on behind closed doors, now out in the open.
After the break, our investigation continues as we expose how NUWAY's questionable billing made the nonprofit's executives rich, and what we found is already leading to bipartisan calls for reform. We'll be right back.
Thank you for bringing this to us.
Thanks, AJ, for this.
This is a big deal.
At a time our state legislature can't seem to agree on anything, Carol Evan's investigation exposing tens of millions of dollars in questionable Medicaid billing is leading to bipartisan calls for reform.
At the Minnesota State Capitol, NUWAY flags fly high. It's September, National Recovery Month, and the nonprofit addiction treatment provider is the leading sponsor of the Walk for Recovery.
And I am here today celebrating the 13th annual Walk for Recovery presented by NUWAY Alliance.
But like the season, at the Capitol, NUWAY's reception is now decidedly chillier.
Need to have their chain jerked pretty hard.
On this, GOP State Representative Dave Baker and DFL State Senator John Hoffman are in bipartisan agreement.
To see this is really heartbreaking.
They say what Carol Evan uncovered, tens of millions of dollars in Medicaid billing, done in a way that even some NUWAY insiders feared qualified as fraud, reveals the nonprofit, long considered a leader in the state's effort to treat addiction, broke a trust.
This is out of control, and we need to do a whole relook at the whole system, I think.
Here's what Carol Evan found happening. Treatment sessions are billed to Medicaid by the hour. The rules state that in order to bill for that hour, the session must go past the midpoint. NUWAY exploited that midpoint rule, scheduling their treatment sessions in 35-minute blocks. So for 35 minutes of treatment, taxpayers were charged for a full hour. But then, records show NUWAY also double billed. Here's how. From 8 to 8:35, they'd bill for an hour. Then at 8:45, they'd start billing for another hour. Double billing for the overlapping 15 minutes. That means every 4 hours of treatment, they billed for 5 hours. inflating their billing by 25%.
A unit is an hour. A unit is an hour.
Yep.
It's not 31 minutes consistently.
We're not talking about pocket change. Medicaid data reveals for just group addiction treatment from 2018 to partway through 2024, NUWAY billed more than $180 million.
Are taxpayers owed a refund based on what you've seen?
Yeah. Absolutely.
They're not billing improperly.
David Glazer is NUWAY's attorney. He maintains the Department of Human Services' midpoint billing rules were vague, and his client did not bill illegally.
The instruction from DHS supports what NUWAY was doing.
What's clear is what NUWAY was doing was making the nonprofit's leaders rich. Hang outside the corporate headquarters, and you'll see C-suite executives in a parade of luxury cars that insiders say are leased by NUWAY. The nonprofit's tax records from 2023, the latest year available, reveal Chief Clinical Officer Ken Roberts paid more than $500,000. COO Tom Meyer paid $723,000. Most eye-popping, CEO David Venice's salary, more than $900,000 a year.
Holy smokes. You're making that kind of money as top level leaders in this operation, and we're seeing this going on here.
Citing credible allegations of fraud, DHS is threatening to begin withholding all payments to NUWAY effective February 21st. NUWAY, which has refused to make its executives available for interviews with KARE 11, recently released a slickly edited video warning of dire outcomes for all their clients if they're shut down.
So if Minneapolis wants to add people to their homeless situation, closing NUWAY would be a good way to do it.
Outgoing DHS Commissioner Jody Harpstead sent KARE 11 a statement that says, in part, it's indefensible when providers use loopholes in state law to circumvent the rules while using the people we are trying to help as a shield to avoid punishment. Lawmakers told us they don't necessarily want to see NUWAY shut down, but they owe taxpayers a massive refund. And now the organization faces its very own long walk for recovery.
They lost their way in this case.
A number of reforms are being introduced at the Capitol to explicitly crack down on exactly what NUWAY was doing. The big question is, what's next for NUWAY? Citing credible allegations of fraud, which include the alleged kickbacks and billing problems, DHS is threatening to begin withholding all Medicaid payments to NUWAY effective February 21st. That would effectively shut down the state's largest addiction treatment provider for low-income people. Clearly, there's a lot at risk here for some of our state's most vulnerable. With a KARE 11 Recovery Inc. investigation, I'm AJ Legault. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, Julie, an unconstitutional death penalty. That's what NUWAY, Minnesota's largest Medicaid provider of outpatient addiction treatment, says it was given as they battle allegations of fraud. They're now suing DHS.
In federal court over the weekend, NUWAY filed a lawsuit against DHS's commissioner. They're seeking a restraining order to prevent DHS from withholding their Medicaid payments starting February 21st. NUWAY's lawyers contend that would, in effect, permanently close their doors.
You're going to wind up with people on the street, and that's bad for society.
In January, KARE 11's investigation exposed how NUWAY exploited legal loopholes and billed tens of millions of dollars to Medicaid while the nonprofit's execs made exorbitant salaries. Internal records from 2022 revealed even some high-ranking NUWAY insiders feared that what they were doing met the definition of fraud. In addition to questionable billing, KARE's investigation uncovered NUWAY's well-publicized practice of paying for clients' sober housing, has state and federal investigators leveling allegations of kickbacks and fraud. The federal investigation's been underway since 2022. While the legality of what NUWAY has done remains contested, KARE 11's investigation discovered DHS knew all about their housing payments and billing for years but allowed it to continue.
I think you asked me if the housing program was a secret. It wasn't. Neither is how they billed.
Exhibits filed as part of the lawsuit contain email exchanges where over the last 10 days, NUWAY pleads with DHS not to suspend funding, arguing they should not get the death penalty. DHS's response, they intend to move forward and stop payments to NUWAY.
Well, NUWAY contends this is a drastic overreaction to all the public criticism DHS is facing regarding its oversight of public funds. While we wait to see what a judge decides, one thing is certain tonight. Nearly 1,000 vulnerable people who receive addiction treatment at NUWAY are caught in the middle of this fight.
With fraud and kickback allegations swirling, a federal court showdown tomorrow could determine the fate of Minnesota's largest addiction treatment provider. Here's AJ Legault with the latest developments in his Recovery, Inc. investigation.
In a week of sub-zero temps, the showdown between NUWAY and the Minnesota Department of Human Services is hitting the boiling point, citing credible allegations of fraud and ongoing state and federal investigations. DHS plans to suspend NUWAY's Medicaid funding for outpatient treatment effective this Friday. In response, NUWAY sued the state in federal court, claiming they've been given an unconstitutional death penalty. In court filings, the Minnesota Attorney General's office defends the state's right to protect public funds, and as evidence of alleged fraudulent billing practices under investigation, points to the findings of Kara Levin's investigation. Here's what we exposed. Treatment sessions are billed to Medicaid by the hour. The rules state that in order to bill for that hour, the session must go past the midpoint. NUWAY exploited that midpoint rule, scheduling their treatment sessions in 35-minute blocks. So for 35 minutes of treatment, taxpayers were charged for a full hour. But then, records show NUWAY also double billed. Here's how. From 8 to 8:35, they'd bill for an hour. Then at 8:45, they'd start billing for another hour. Double billing for the overlapping 15 minutes. That means every 4 hours of treatment, they billed for 5 hours, inflating their billing by 25%. The Attorney General's office now writes NUWAY twists that minimum requirement into a purported blanket approval of its systematic practice of wringing 2 billable hours out of 70 actual minutes of treatment time, and unconvincingly attempts to justify its practice by arguing that a DHS policy did not specifically tell it not to do that. NUWAY, in court filings and in an interview with their attorney David Glazer, defends their billing.
They're not billing improperly.
I'll be blunt.
Yeah.
Billing for 5 hours for 4 hours of work sounds an awful lot like fraud.
But they're not billing 5 hours for 4 hours work. What they're doing is billing in a way that's consistent with the instruction that DHS gave.
NUWAY's well-publicized practice of paying for clients' sober housing, for which they've received accolades, also has state and federal investigators leveling allegations of kickbacks. In an emergency hearing on Thursday, NUWAY will ask a judge for an order of protection barring DHS from withholding payment until the outcome of their legal battle is decided.
Caught in the middle of all this, more than 1,000 people across the state who get their addiction treatment at NUWAY, and many of those also have their sober housing paid for by NUWAY. We'll be covering the Thursday hearing. For Kara Levin Investigates, I'm AJ Legault.
Potentially fatal blow handed down by a judge in federal court for one of Minnesota's largest addiction treatment providers.
We've been closely covering the allegations at NUWAY of kickbacks and fraud. AJ Legault joining us now with the latest developments in his Recovery, Inc. investigation. And AJ, this court ruling has massive implications tonight for a lot of people.
Lauren, it's hard to overstate the potential fallout. Today, a federal judge issued a ruling that allows the Minnesota Department of Human Services to go ahead and freeze Medicaid payments to NUWAY, the organization that provides treatment and pays for the housing of roughly 1,000 people across the state, calls it a death sentence.
Facing what the state labels credible allegations of fraud and ongoing investigations, NUWAY's ability to bill Medicaid for outpatient treatment is now frozen. In a federal court Hail Mary, NUWAY asked a judge to order DHS not to cut off funding, arguing the move was an unconstitutional death penalty and could result in client overdoses and deaths.
NUWAY said in court that people are going to overdose and die if the payment suspension stays. What's your response to that?
I'm happy to set up a time to talk with you. I have to run right now.
DHS's temporary commissioner, Shireen Gandhi, said she was too busy to talk with KARE 11 yesterday, following a legislative hearing into fraud on DHS's watch. The agency contends it's working with counties and other providers to help people impacted by the NUWAY billing freeze. Prior, KARE 11 reporting exposed tens of millions of dollars in questionable Medicaid billing by NUWAY, which is also under a federal kickback investigation for their practice of paying for clients' sober home rent. NUWAY execs left court last week hoping for a judicial stay of execution. They did not get it. Denied, Judge John Thunheim ruled today. He found DHS has the right to move forward to protect the public from fraud, but also wrote the court is deeply concerned with the plight of NUWAY's patients who may suffer irreparable harm. Facing what the state labels credible allegations of fraud and ongoing investigations, NUWAY's ability to bill Medicaid for outpatient treatment is now frozen. In a federal court Hail Mary, NUWAY asked a judge to order DHS not to cut off funding, arguing the move was an unconstitutional death penalty and could result in client overdoses and deaths.
NUWAY said in court that people are going to overdose and die if the payment suspension stays. What's your response to that?
I'm happy to set up a time to talk with you. I have to run right now.
DHS's temporary commissioner, Shireen Gandhi, said she was too busy to talk with KARE 11 yesterday, following a legislative hearing into fraud on DHS's watch. The agency contends it's working with counties and other providers to help people impacted by the NUWAY billing freeze. Prior, KARE 11 reporting exposed tens of millions of dollars in questionable Medicaid billing by NUWAY, which is also under a federal kickback investigation for their practice of paying for clients' sober home rent. NUWAY execs left court last week hoping for a judicial stay of execution. They did not get it. Denied, Judge John Thunheim ruled today. He found DHS has the right to move forward to protect the public from fraud, but also wrote the court is deeply concerned with the plight of NUWAY's patients who may suffer irreparable harm.
NUWAY's attorney messaged me this afternoon that DHS's decision to freeze payments is going to hurt a lot of people, but NUWAY plans to put together an ethical transition plan as the law requires for their clients' treatment. The big question, though, tonight is where will all of these people live, given that NUWAY was paying their sober home rent? There's a real fear that this will cause a housing crisis for a lot of vulnerable people working towards recovery.
New tonight, NUWAY is shutting down its outpatient program and starting mass layoffs after the state suspended Medicaid payments, citing credible allegations of fraud.
Clients of the state's largest addiction treatment program are learning that they now just have 60 days to find new treatment and places to live. Our AJ Legault has the latest developments in his investigation, Recovery Inc.
Labeling the state's funding freeze devastating and unjust, NUWAY, in an email obtained by KARE 11, announced they're shutting down their outpatient program 60 days from today, leaving partners and clients scrambling.
Where do I go? What do I do?
Those are questions being asked in sober living homes across Minnesota today.
Constant questions of where am I going to end up?
Matthew Barnier is a little over a year sober. A graduate of NUWAY, he's now working as a house manager at his sober living home.
All the guys in our house, 10 guys, they all went to NUWAY or are currently at NUWAY.
It fell to Matt to break the news to his house about the contents of this email. It was sent by Sam Woolery, NUWAY's Recovery Residence Resource Director, and says, I message you with a heavy heart today to sadly confirm that NUWAY has exhausted our options to reverse the DHS payment suspension and that they are going to wind down NUWAY's services.
10 guys sitting around going, what do we do?
go, well, I don't really have answers yet. There's a lot of fear, not only in the recovery industry, but in our homes.
Jim Adams is the owner of a network of sober homes, including Matt's. He's already planning to close down some of his homes, including the one we're sitting in. NUWAY has paid for clients in their program, currently about 1,000 people, to live in sober housing. But the government now calls that arrangement a kickback, part of the fraud allegations NUWAY is facing, leading DHS to freeze Medicaid payments.
This is a horrible thing for people who are seeking recovery right now. Long term, I don't know. There's no solutions that have been defined yet.
NUWAY is also announcing mass layoffs, telling the state today in this letter that on April 30th, they will terminate approximately 174 employees. The scramble now on for NUWAY's clients to find new treatment and for many, places to live.
For all NUWAY's faults, it provided stability.
You can read NUWAY's email detailing their shutdown plans in its entirety on KARE11.com.
In that KARE11 story, it's a pretty obvious overbilling.
Minnesota's newly formed House Fraud Prevention Committee today questioning DHS leadership about fraud on the agency's watch.
Report about Evergreen from KARE11, that was one of the examples. Things like one person billed 203 hours in one day.
Representative Marion Rarick and other lawmakers cited multiple CARE investigations into addiction recovery centers, including Evergreen, NUWAY, and the Refocus Recovery Kairos partnership, where CARE found DHS allowed millions of dollars to go out the door even after red flags were raised.
I find this stunning. Kairos's lawyer threatened to sue the state, and Commissioner Harpstead personally granted a certification so they could keep billing Medicaid.
I can't speak for past situations that I was not intimately involved in.
DHS Acting Commissioner Shireen Gandhi offered few specifics on those cases, but laid out proposals they want to see implemented moving forward.
And fraud against these public programs is unacceptable.
Today, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison introduced a bill with bipartisan backing to crack down on Medicaid fraud.
Medicaid fraud isn't only illegal, it is also immoral and reprehensible.
The proposal adds staff to the Fraud Control Unit, gives them subpoena powers for bank records, and increases sentences for Medicaid thieves.
Right now, someone could steal millions of Medicaid, doing harm to our most vulnerable neighbors, and the maximum penalty would be the same as if they stole a flat screen TV.
There are a number of additional anti-fraud measures set to be introduced here in the coming weeks, including one that we're going to be paying close attention to that specifically outlaws kickbacks. Minnesota, one of about 20 states that currently does not have a statute that expressly forbids them. At the Capitol, for KARE11 Investigates, I'm AJ Legault.
Cracking down on fraud was one of the top topics at the legislature this year. This week, the special session came to a close. KARE11 investigative reporter AJ Legault takes a look at some of the key reforms introduced to better protect taxpayer money.
At NUWAY, Minnesota's largest addiction treatment provider, with satellite centers across the state, KARE11 exposed a complex pattern of double billing, costing taxpayers tens of millions of dollars. Here's what was happening. Treatment sessions are billed to Medicaid by the hour. The rules state that in order to bill for that hour, the session must go past the midpoint. NUWAY exploited that midpoint rule, scheduling their treatment sessions in 35-minute blocks. So for 35 minutes of treatment, taxpayers were charged for a full hour. But then, records show NUWAY also double billed. Here's how. From 8 to 8:35, they'd bill for an hour. Then at 8:45, they'd start billing for another hour, double billing for the overlapping 15 minutes. That means every 4 hours of treatment, they billed for 5 hours, inflating their billing by 25%. In response, lawmakers promised reforms.
This is out of control, and we need to do a whole relook at the whole system.
Here's what they did. They passed a policy fix to eliminate the midpoint billing loophole and specifically ban duplicative billing.
As part of our Recovery Inc. investigation into Medicaid fraud, we also discovered another glaring loophole in Minnesota law. Kickbacks, a federal crime, were not illegal under state statute. That's now changed.
How surprised were you to learn that kickbacks were not technically illegal in Minnesota?
We were stunned.
Republican State Representative Kristen Robbins was chair of the new Fraud Prevention Committee. In hearings, Carol Evans' investigations were frequently cited when the FBI raided Evergreen Recovery, another treatment provider, last summer. One of the charges was illegal kickbacks in the form of providing free housing in exchange for attendance at treatment services. The DOJ has made similar allegations about NUWAY. NUWAY argued Minnesota DHS has known all about their housing subsidies for years and raised no concerns.
Commissioner, are you saying that you don't have the authority to prohibit kickbacks?
When questioned, DHS's temporary commissioner told the fraud committee with kickbacks, their hands were tied.
It's my understanding that we do not have the authority in state statute to take action.
That was one of the most stunning hearings.
Was it obvious to lawmakers that kickbacks needed to be made illegal in state
Absolutely. Strong bipartisan support.
NUWAY itself was forced to make major changes. DHS cut off funding for their outpatient treatment, which served more than 800 patients. That resulted in NUWAY shuttering their program in late April. They now operate just residential treatment with 226 beds. All references to CEO David Venice, whom Carol Evans exposed made nearly $1 million a year running the nonprofit, disappeared from NUWAY's website. In an email, NUWAY attorney David Glazer told Carol Evans they eliminated all C-suite and VP level positions, and while some leaders stayed in new roles, they are reflective in both salary and title of a dramatically smaller organization.
There were a number of anti-fraud measures that did not pass, including increased penalties for Medicaid thieves. Currently, no matter how much Medicaid money is stolen, you can't be sentenced to more than 2.5 years. That's similar to what you'd get for stealing a flat-screen TV. So clearly, lawmakers have a lot more work to do when they come back next year. For Carol Evans Investigates at the Capitol, I'm AJ Legault.
Whistleblower revelations of kickbacks and fraud. Tonight, Carol Evans Investigates has the story of how Minnesota's largest addiction treatment provider ended up in the federal crosshairs, paying millions of dollars to settle allegations of massive Medicaid fraud scheme. AJ Legault has the latest developments in his long-running investigation, Recovery Inc.
$18.5 million. That's how much NUWAY is paying to settle claims that they double-billed taxpayers for treatment services and provided kickbacks to clients in the form of free housing. Newly unsealed court records reveal how whistleblowers sounded the alarm.
Mired in allegations of fraud, NUWAY, just months ago the state's largest provider of addiction treatment services, has now shuttered its outpatient program, which served more than 800 patients across Minnesota. Today, signage is gone. Buildings sit empty. NUWAY now also cutting taxpayers and whistleblowers a massive check.
They had to pay $18.5 million to resolve this case.
Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, along with the United States Attorney's Office, announced they'd won the case settlement. It resolves claims NUWAY, as detailed in prior Carol Evans investigations, ripped off Medicaid through housing kickbacks and a double billing scheme as it grew into the state's dominant addiction treatment provider.
It looks like NUWAY was trying to position itself almost as too big to fail.
Yeah, that really was part of it. But nobody's too big to fail. And everybody has to obey the rules no matter how big they are.
Newly unsealed court records reveal the official investigation began when 3 separate whistleblowers came forward starting back in 2021.
All 3 of the NUWAY whistleblowers who will receive a share of that $18.5 million settlement declined to comment when contacted by Carol Evans.
Their allegations, as spelled out in court records, are damning. NUWAY's former CFO, John Marston, alleged deception and commoditization of client care through numerous schemes to inflate and falsify billing, resulting in excessive compensation. Example, the nonprofit's CEO, David Venice, demanding and receiving a luxury company car, a Mercedes-Benz worth approximately $200,000. CARE's prior investigation revealed Venice made nearly $1 million a year. NUWAY's former revenue cycle director, Morgan Kluwander, also blew the whistle after discovering the complex double billing scheme NUWAY utilized to get paid for 4 hours of work in 2 hours.
Clients were not receiving as many hours of treatment as taxpayers were paying for?
That's right. That's exactly right.
A VP at Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge named Tim Walsh is the third whistleblower. He told the feds his competitor was overprescribing high-intensity outpatient treatment using free housing as an unlawful inducement. That means kickback.
Is that a recipe for overbilling?
It's a recipe, it's a petri dish, it's an environment where bad things are going to happen.
NUWAY's attorney says he believes his clients violated no laws, but they decided to settle so they could focus on their mission of treating patients. They now focus solely on inpatient care, but most of their C-suite execs, including their $1 million a year CEO, David Venice, were let go. For KARE 11 Investigates, I'm AJ Legault.